It's just as estranged as it was the day that my husband abandoned me with my family's support, with my family standing behind him. And there's been no more. There's been never any open discussion about why any of that. There's never been any, and the distance between all the family members has worked to my ex-husband's advantage beautifully. It's worked beautifully for him, and so he had to stay involved with my family because he had to still continue to manage them. So it worked really well for him. Like, he married someone who was divisive and wanted to, keep playing at those games. My sister-in-law, and she basically, in the criteria, she would befriend everyone that had a problem with me. So everyone that wouldn't talk to me, she would befriend. So she didn't like. I always had a problem with my father-in-law, for instance, because he still had a relationship with me. So she, was very much into conflict and wanted, an amicable family situation was never on her list of priorities. It wasn't what she wanted ever. So, but, she came in after the fact. She came in like 2006. And by then, my husband and I had been divorced for a year or two. Me, when he met her, and so that kind of was, a relief for me. And then he got really involved with helping her do to her husband what they'd done to me. So, the only person who I've ever seen whose divorce I've ever heard about was anything close to as outrageous as mine was when I read through the papers and talked to her ex-husband. I mean, I think that maybe even that one was maybe even more outlandish than mine. But then the minute they got done with him, a couple years later, they were back to me. And, just always needing the narcissistic supply and the chaos and the conflict and, a lot of legal abuse and a lot of financial abuse and all that kind of stuff. But what worked really well for them was to keep me, to keep infusing false information into my family, that my family continued to believe. They were always very willing to believe the worst of me and not ever have to check it out, never have to have any kind of evidence, and never questioning the source, never questioning that the source is my ex-husband. And so my kids grew up in this environment where they have this family, and they're all people that they love, and they're all people that, other than their father, a lot of neglect. And there is a lot of putting them in the middle of conflict, and there's a lot of there's a lot of things that they're not doing. Not protecting the kids, not being careful what they say, not being examples of warmth and empathy and compassion, and, not being truthful and honest, not putting the kids' needs first, a lot of that. And so we have this close family all in this small town together that is just a toxic pit. I mean, it's turned out to be nothing good about it, nothing at all good about it. And so my sons, they wanted a family. They wanted to belong, because we all do. It's an inherent need that we have. And so, but they couldn't have a family. They knew their mom, and they knew what the truth was about their mom. And so it never rang true for them, the things that they were hearing, the way people were acting. It never made sense to them based on who they knew their mom to be. But even aside from that, there was just on the level of that they loved their mom, and they needed their mom in kid-like ways. So there was a whole bunch of things that they wouldn't understand. So then there were places where they might have wondered about things because they didn't know, because they were kids. They didn't understand it. They were confused by it. And as they got older, they would figure it out that they could trust me all along, that those were things that, that shouldn't have been said and shouldn't have been done that way, and that weren't plausible even in a grown-up sense. But when they needed their mom regardless. So even if, here's the thing, this is the thing that just never made any sense to me, was that their big thing was that I was either crazy or a drug addict. These were their things. And the evidence, the evidence was primarily that I acted crazy in any normal situation, but given the situation I was in, my behavior made perfect sense. So there was that. So there was the fact that people didn't understand the situation I was in, and then looked at my behavior, and it might have looked crazy. So there was that. There was a lot of things, like physically, that were going on. Like I wasn't sleeping well, I was losing weight, and all those things that made perfect sense for stress that were getting associated to drugs. And then there was the very real fact that I was injured, and I was taking medications that I'd never taken before, and so there was that. And then there was the depression that I had, and that I had that predated that I was taking these antidepressants and stuff, and I thought I was crazy. So I was not a good. I mean, I wasn't a good advocate for myself in saying that I wasn't the one that was going to get up there and say, oh, no, I'm perfectly sane, because I doubted myself. So I had a lot of self-doubt about my sanity and about my perceptions and my ability because it was a crazy making situation. And I certainly thought I was a lot crazier than I turned out to be. Once I got away from them and started piecing it all together, I was pretty sane, but I didn't know. I didn't know that, and then there were simple things like where they would just take pieces, tidbits of information that were true, and put them out of context, change the order around, put them together with untrue pieces or half-true pieces, and try and make cause and effect relationships that were logical and plausible. Certainly, probably more plausible than what was really going on. They were not as strange as they were, because reality was certainly stranger than fiction, but they were fiction. They weren't true. And then the other thing is that there was no one person that knew everything. He knew the most. He knew what he was really doing. He knew what he was telling people he was doing, and he knew what the truth was to some extent. I think he definitely started losing track of the truth. He started believing his own lies. Once he got really going, he started really believing the things that really it did all belong to him, and he was entitled to everything. And he started believing the things he was doing. I think he started believing I was an enemy, because in his mind, in his sociopathic mind, the way that it works, I was an enemy, because I was an enemy because I wasn't fulfilling his needs anymore, and I had to go. And so by definition, that was going to make me an enemy. But so there's all this stuff going on in this family. And so here we are now, we're 15 years later, go forward 15 years later. And we've never talked about any of it. Nothing's been resolved. The family still hangs out with my ex. And no one really talks to anyone. My brother has, he's now divorced. He's had a DUI. He's had definitely everything that I was ever being accused of, that ever was at the bottom of all these conflicts that people were having, that I was that were the basis of everyone's superiority. But there was no reason for him to. Everyone's there now too. It's like and my brother's kids, they've gone through. That's probably their thing. That's probably their, what their one thing that has tarnished their perfect world, is that their parents are divorced, and that their brother had affair. I'm sorry, my brother, their dad, had affairs. So he fell a little bit from grace right there. but the difference between those kids and my sons is tragic. It's a tragic difference. I mean, it's, and because, you know, they're just really regular kids. They're privileged kids. They're kids that have had a life where they've been protected and they've been guarded and they've been able to be kids and assume that the world was going to be safe and happy and that things were going to work out for them. And, you know, basically they had the life more or less that I expected my kids to have. Only my kids were in the middle of a conflict. And not only that, my kids were severely abused by their father. And it was a kind of abuse that now one of the things going on for my remaining son is that he only had one witness, and they only had each other to go through it with, because no one saw it. It's completely invalidated by anyone. And I can validate it, but I wasn't there to see it all, A, and B, there's always this piece of, that they love their dad, and so they could be together talking about their dad because they know they both love him. With me, it's like they know that I don't love him and we're divorced, and so even though they know me not to be, I wouldn't ever I wouldn't ever say anything bad about someone if it wasn't true, or wouldn't ever say something bad to, the only thing I would ever do would be to try and protect them. And even that's been, I've asked myself a million questions since my son has passed away about whether or not I got involved enough, whether or not I protected him enough, because he was abused, and I put a lot of faith in their resilience, and that there would be enough witnesses, that they wouldn't be so bad, and that they would, that I would make up everything when they came to my house. That I just didn't know what I could do to help. I didn't know what I could do to stop it, and so I just had to counteract it as best I could. But I asked myself, now that my son has died, if I really, because I knew at times that he was a threat to their lives. I knew that he was. So, so here we are. So this next generation was my question. And so they're over today, and they don't have any idea. They don't have any idea what's happened to the family. They have spent a lot more time with their uncle than they have ever with me. And they don't know the things that their parents have done to me, the things their parents have done to their cousins. They don't know the thing, like it happens to be my dad's birthday today, and they were like, oh yeah, we got to call him. I mean, they just have to them, the family seems just perfectly normal. It's like nothing strange at all has happened. There's, got to call grandpa for his birthday, got to, this and that, they talked about their mom and their dad and their grandpa and and just like it was all a perfectly normal family. And if you come and take a snapshot today, you would have thought perfectly normal family. You never would have thought that you were looking at people who, that these people that we had, that their cousin just died of self-induced death. Wasn't a suicide, but it was close. An accidental drug overdose, because he was so filled with anxiety and he had complex PTSD from his father and from his family, but from his childhood situation. And he wasn't over it. He was not over it. And it had been compounded then by the things that the traumas that he took on with his new lifestyle. That he did have, he was in dangerous situations and things. He hadn't he hadn't been putting himself in a safe situations. He had ongoing trauma, because of but he even had ongoing trauma because he still had contact with his family. And it was not even 2 months ago that my son, the one that's still living, was getting his hair cut by my brother's former wife, and she was gossiping about, saying things about me, even just a couple of months ago. So that's been an ongoing thing. She has no contact with me. There would be nothing anyone could say there's no new information. There's been no new interactions with me since 2005. So there is nothing new anyone could say to me. And what you could say from afar, just from looking at a distance, would all be good. Would be that I'm doing well. I've gotten married. I'm doing, seemingly doing well. If you were looking for evidence that I was doing well, you'd find it. If you were looking for evidence that I'm not doing well, you'd have to make it up. Except for now with my son dying. But up before that, there was evidence that my son wasn't doing well. There was lots of evidence of that, because he was in and out of treatment. He was, he was struggling with a drug problem, but he wasn't, he wasn't confronting. He wasn't confronting the family either. He did a little bit of standing up for me, but he was still a kid. And here's the thing. The thing of it is we all want to believe what they're telling us. You know what I mean? He wants to believe that his family. When my brother says to him, "Oh, I love my sister. I love your mom." Oh, my son wanted to believe that. Of course, he wanted to believe that. He wanted to believe that I was loved. He wanted to believe that, and he loves me, and so he was thinking, of course, who could not love my mom? You know what I mean? He's thinking, of course, he loves her. But he didn't understand that. But my brother, there's nothing about the way that he treats me, that has to do with love. That you don't treat someone you love this way. You don't. And so, our collective misunderstanding of what love is, and our skewed and weird definition of what love is, only contributes to it. It's like, this is why embracing reality is my thing. Embracing reality, because if you insist on reality, if you embrace reality, it really boils things down. It keeps things really simple. Then you can kind of, it cuts through a lot of these things. But so this is all a complicated story, and not only that, but it's a story no one wants to believe, particularly not the people in it. And so, my ex-husband and my parents, where would we be? And my kids and I would have had a life that was infinitely better, and those kids would have grown up together. Those kids would have grown up with more unconditional love than they had, because they would have had me, and they would have had each other, and they would have seen compassion. They wouldn't have witnessed as much lovelessness as they did. Now, my sons were aware of it. My brother's kids were not aware of it. And so what they mostly didn't get to see, they didn't see so much. They didn't see any of this ugliness. But they also didn't see, there was a lot of opportunity cost for them. But they also didn't get to see their family rally around someone during a hard time. They didn't get to see me overcoming anything. They didn't get to see, they didn't get to see a family sticking together and doing the right thing, and someone showing some character and integrity. And, those things my sons did get to see. They got to see with me. They got to see all that I overcame and all that I did. But they saw a lot of bad behavior, a lot of bad stuff. And they didn't get to see nearly enough compassion and kindness. So, that's the tragic thing, is that, and here's the thing is, I'll bet you, if I'd been a widow, and lost my parents, those kids would have seen a lot of compassion and sympathy, and they would have seen a community that was, today I believe that we would think that the world was a much kinder place than my sons could possibly believe it was. Because the truth is that they were very alone. We were very, very alone. My ex-husband and my parents have been nothing but enemies to us, and they've made life just infinitely more difficult than it ever would have been without them in it. And we had no other enemies. There weren't other enemies, but in theory, your family is supposed to be there to protect you and rally around you and support you in times of crisis. And in our case, the family were the crisis makers.